Well, hello and welcome to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself and Welsh. Today's story is one that is truly inspiring. What do you do when your husband of 15 years leave you for another man? How do you deal with that pain? How do you tell the world, people who came to your wedding, that now my husband is leaving me, not for another woman, but for another man? Do you tell them? Do you keep quiet about it? And what do you tell him? Do you ask him questions about why he married you? Today we'll be talking to Carolyn Hobdey. She just went through that pain. In the UK, we all heard about that pain initially last year, when Philip Scotchfield, TV presenter, talked about it. Talked about leaving his family, his wife, and coming out as gay. The whole world was shocked. But the whole world also understood the pain that he must have been in to be in that marriage for that long. Caroline will be sharing her own story on how she dealt with that pain, how it was for her to find out that the man she loved is now leaving her, but not for another woman, but for another man. The betrayal pain, the affair pain, and many, many more. She'll be telling us about her journey. Before we get started, I will let Carolyn introduce herself, because nothing better beats a person telling you about who they are. Meet Caroline Hobdey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself and Welsh. As I previously mentioned in my introduction, we have a fascinating conversation today. Caroline, how are you?
Good, thank you. You okay?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm really, it started to rain here. So I'm like, okay, dull and grey, but it's a lovely day. So I'm happy. How is everything going on with you? How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very busy. Working very hard. Trying to make the most of, I guess, lockdown and the opportunity of not going out and doing very much because I used to have a very busy social life. So I'm, making the most of the time that we can't do that and just trying to really push forward with my business.
Absolutely. I think that's what most people are now trying to do. Just figure out, okay, we can't do the other stuff. So what now can we now incorporate in our life? Your story really hit the Daily Mail, hit so many different news outlets, and I was so inspired by it because you came out and told a very inspiring, truthful story, and you told it from the bottom of your heart to really help other women who might be going through, or even men who might be going through such challenge. But before we dig into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because I think it always comes best from you when you tell a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So I spent 20 years working in human resources. I had a very fantastic and successful corporate career. I worked for some great, notable organizations. So some of the world's largest employers. I worked with some of the most internationally recognized brands as a result of that, which was really exciting, great experience. Worked my way up gradually through the field of HR, ended up as a statutory board director and in a couple of different organizations. And then my world all imploded in the summer of 2018, where I sort of lost everything. And I lost my job, I lost my relationship, I lost my stepchildren, I lost my home, all in the space of about 10 days. And it set me on a very different path in life. And I started to write my book and decided that I sort of pressed reset on myself, who I was as a person, and sort of a little bit further down the line, sort of what made me happy. So whilst I'd sort of got myself another corporate job by that point, just realized that actually the things that once had made me happy or thoughts that I thought made me happy actually weren't things that made me happy at all. And decided to give it up and go it alone, start my own business. So I started Mayday Limited and just published my book.
It's so what you just said was really true though, because sometimes we're in a bubble and we think this bubble is making us happy because it's making us comfortable, it's giving us all the energy we need, not realizing there's a better bubble out there. But sometimes it takes courage to get out of that bubble, bust that bubble and say, okay, let me get, and it only takes, I say to people, sometimes it takes pain. Something has to happen because if you're not courageous as a person, you just get comfortable and you suck yourself into this. And all of a sudden, when something happens, then your courage, you're like, I didn't realize I was this strong to do this. Tell us about that, your marriage. What happened in the marriage?
So I met my husband. I met my husband on a training course actually. It was a course where we went once a week, one evening a week, on this course for 12 weeks. And the reason I just explained that is that the part of the purpose of the course, it was kind of like a part confidence, part sort of presentation skills, public speaking type course. And the way in which they honed our skills was getting us, quite often we would talk about things from our lives. So the reason I mention that is that what it meant is that for everybody on the course, we all got to know each other quite intensively, quite quickly, because every week you were standing up talking 2, maybe 3 times, and they would give you a subject and it would usually be something sort of quite personal. So you got insights very quickly to people in a way that you wouldn't normally do. So I met him on that course, and therefore, because of that intensive sort of getting to know each other thing, our relationship beyond the course accelerated quite quickly. So sort of 9 months, maybe even less, after first meeting him, we were engaged, because I think it had all, like I said, moved on very quickly in that first 3 months. He's a great guy, smart, very funny, intelligent, great humor, lots in common. Intellectually, we were really well matched. We got married, and that was that. He was 11 years older than me. He'd been married before, and he really nurtured me. I think certainly from a career point of view, I have a lot to be grateful for in terms of what he did, because he'd had a very interesting career himself. He'd sort of progressed very quickly at a young age, and he was able to sort of help and support me in my career, like I said, because of the sort of age gap between us. So it was really good, and great. I guess we were very busy. We both worked very hard. We both had demanding jobs and careers, and I guess I didn't know really that there was anything missing. I have to be honest, until somebody else walked into my life, and it was a little bit like a light bulb moment, that I just hadn't even been expecting, because I thought I was really happy. Like you say, a little bit in that bubble. I thought I was really happy, and there I was. And then suddenly somebody came along and I guess like stuck a pin in my bubble, and I suddenly, poof, the bubble burst, and you're sort of going, oh look, there's other bubbles. And so that person came along, and I did the wrong stuff. I got into a relationship with that person, but it completely sort of shone a light on the things that had been absent in my marriage, which really, for the most part, all the other boxes were ticked, but that intimacy was lacking. And I hadn't, being very busy, we often were quite tired, and so you just sort of almost don't realize that stuff is gone. And I suppose I hadn't really thought much about it until somebody else came along that I guess reignited that in my life. And and so we sort of stumbled along, and I guess tried to recover from some of that. But I thought the breakdown of my marriage was entirely my fault because of that, and I spent 6 years thinking that it was entirely my fault and taking all the blame. And I spiraled as a person. I just completely kind of died inside, and just had a terrible, terrible time for that 6 years, when I just thought I was a terrible, despicable human being. I wasn't worthy of my husband. I wasn't worthy of love from anybody. And it was after that, those 6 years, that I realized that my husband would sort of I thought he was getting into another relationship, and sort of saw some of the classic signs of that. The phone, like the text would go off on the phone and he'd sort of leap for it in that kind of excited way that you do at the start of an early relationship. And it was then that I realized that those texts were coming from a guy. And in a very short space, I had no inkling whatsoever about my husband's sexuality, none whatsoever. Like I said, he'd been married before, and that's,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
scary.
That's what struck me. Is the whole thing is that you just said, and I didn't know this before we had this conversation. I didn't know he actually was married before, so there would be no signs at all. But was in the intimacy bits, did you not feel that there was something different at all with your husband?
No, I would say that we, our sort of intimate relationship was at the outset of our marriage was very good. I'd been in relationships before. Obviously every one of those is different in different ways, but there was nothing. There was no indication for me whatsoever in terms of, how that intimacy was, how good that intimacy was, what it entailed. It was what I would call, a sort of normal heterosexual intimate relationship.
That's it. Okay. Wow. No, that's it. And when you found out, how did you feel when you knew he's now this is now these texts are coming. He's excited about these texts. Okay, he might be in a relationship with someone. Then when you found out that he actually was a guy, can you tell us that painful moment and how did you deal with that?
Um, I'll be honest, to start with, it wasn't painful. I think I realized it was a guy, and like I said, all the bits of the jigsaw fell into place like really rapidly. Like I'd had no indication, no inclination at all. And then all of a sudden, like, all these little bits of information sort of fell together. So I asked him, I chose to sort of say to him, who's this person, and whatever. And he, said, yeah, that it's a guy, and we talked about it. And to be honest, to start with, there wasn't pain, there was relief, because suddenly it made sense of a whole load of stuff
Yeah.
about our relationship. Why the intimacy had disappeared, why sort of when I'd when I'd had the affair and sort of our relationship broke down, he hadn't really fought for
Yeah.
me. Why, when I went through the premature menopause, and discovered I couldn't have children, and why he cared for me during that time, but what I really needed was somebody that was going to really make me feel like a woman at a point when I sort of didn't feel very feminine or very attractive, and he just couldn't step into that space. So it just made a whole load of stuff make sense. So actually it was a sense of relief initially rather than pain.
Mm. Did it make it worse that it was a guy, not a girl?
In time, yes. I think once that sort of initial relief, I think then some of the anger set in. And again, it took a while to do that. The guy that he was texting and was in a relationship with, I met that person, really liked them, sort of embraced all of that. And I really sort of said, like, I want you to be happy. He'd had a very tough life in his younger years, and I wanted him to be happy. So I really embraced that. It was after that relationship ended, that he then started making what I saw to be some more questionable choices in terms of his behavior and his relationship choices. And I think that's when the pain started to come out. And I think the anger then, we started having more detailed conversations about sort of our history together, how he'd felt at various points, the fact that he'd known from the age of 14 about his sexuality, and that's when the pain started to come out, I think, because I felt really angry. I felt like he'd stolen at what it felt at that point in my life was the best years of my life. I could have had a different relationship if he hadn't have done what he'd done. I could have, I'm not saying I necessarily could have had my own children, but I think if I'd been with somebody else and we'd had a different kind of intimate relationship, me discovering about my childlessness might have happened sooner, and I would have stood more of a chance to have been able to do something about that. So yeah, all of that pain, I think, came out, probably several months down the line. It probably took 6 or 8 months before that came out.
If I ask you the question about how he felt, because you know it must have been difficult for him to live this life of
Yeah.
life, or you know, married people twice, and you know, live this life. When you said your bubble burst, that you lost your kids, stepkids, you lost your, you know, your husband, you lost your home. How did that all come about? What happened that you lost everything?
So that was much further down the line. So that was a relationship after my marriage. So that I got into a relationship with somebody who had children, very much encouraged me to sort of co-parent those children. They were with us sort of 50% of the time. The rest of the time they were with their mothers. But you know, I was very much encouraged to sort of take them on, and never in the sense of trying to be a mother to them, because that wouldn't be right. They had mothers of their own, but you know, very much to co-parent. And you know, they were reasonably young. Certainly the youngest was very young, and so therefore, you know, whether you call it mother or not, you know, they look for certain things from you as an adult. And certainly the youngest used to say, I have two mummies. The youngest used to say, you know, and that was never anything driven by me, or my partner for that matter, but that's how that small child understood it. And that's the care and the relationship that child was looking for. So yes, you know, I stepped up and into that place, very much. But sort of how all of that broke down. So you know, that individual, you know, it was quite a toxic relationship. I suffered from emotional abuse in that relationship. So it all started off absolutely brilliant and great, as it often does with, I would suggest that person was had narcissistic personality disorder, and all started off great and wonderful and sweeping me off my feet and all being amazing, and then it starts to turn and become something very, very different and more sinister. And yeah, so you know, when that imploded, I guess, you know, the work situation was that my boss said and wrote some stuff that he shouldn't have done, and it made my position as an HR senior HR person untenable. So I was leaving my job, and initially my partner had gone, don't worry, it'll all be fine, you know, we're selling the house, or we'd sort of sold the house, we're going to buy somewhere else, don't worry, I've got your back. And just over a week later, walked into the room and went, actually, when the house sells, this is over, you need to leave. And it turned out he'd found my replacement, and asked her to marry him. So yeah, he got engaged to somebody else.
Wow, thanks for sharing that story, because when we go to the end, when you tell us about what you're doing now, people will not understand how you've been through all of this and look at you now. So in terms of communicating it, because I still remember my wedding, and you know, I saw your beautiful wedding pictures with your husband, your former husband, and it was beautiful. And I'm believing that we're guests on that day who attended the wedding. How do you communicate such a thing to your family and friends that were at your wedding?
Um, I think that was really hard. I didn't tell my family for 6 months after I found out. And there were a couple of reasons for that. I think I needed to process it. I felt embarrassed. I think that was the primary thing. Not embarrassed of him. I've never been embarrassed of him and his sexuality. I think I just felt embarrassed of the fact the relationship had ended. You know, the people very much closest to me knew, obviously, I'd had this affair. So, you know, I was still sort of carrying the shame of that. I felt that I'd let them down. My family very much had embraced him and loved him. And I felt a bit like I'd broken their hearts when I broke the marriage. So all of that was sort of going on for me. And I think I felt a little bit like I wanted to protect them from the news, because they'd already sort of been a bit heartbroken that my marriage had failed. And now I was sort of adding another layer on. So so I sort of kept it to myself, I think partly because I needed to process it, partly because actually as a family, a few months after I found out, we'd already got a big holiday planned as a family with my extended family. And because I live some distance from them, I don't get to see them all the time. So this big holiday, we're all going to America, we're all going together. It's going to be, we were so excited about it. And there's part of me that just sort of didn't want this thing being the elephant in the room and taking the edge off that holiday, because I just knew that the proximity of it they wouldn't have had time to properly process it. They hadn't had the time to spend lots of time with me all in one go and therefore talk about it. And I thought, I don't want to go on this holiday and then sort of in our downtime in the evenings, then sort of be processing and talking about sort of my marriage and what had gone on and helping them to process it. So I've decided to sort of protect them from it and not tell them until the other side of that, so that I'd had time to come to terms with it, and then they could come to terms with it and talk to me about it, not at a time when we were all meant to be away enjoying ourselves. And I guess, I told a small number of people, and I suppose I just sort of let it go from there, because a lot of it is just my business, and I just needed to deal with it in the way that I chose. And it's why it took such a long time for me to then go away and write about it, because I just wanted to deal with it in my own time and my own way.
That is really brave. I love that though. I love the fact that you said you went on the holiday, you didn't feel that, and because I can imagine how holidays are, and everyone then focus all the attention on you, and rather than enjoying themselves, this is not what you need at the holiday. You just need that enjoyment with them as well. Not everyone focuses so much attention on you. How did he take it when, being a man and hiding himself for so many years? How did he take it with the outside world? How did he come out and to stand now on his 2 feet to say, look, this is who I am and this is what I want to keep doing?
Yeah, I think very quietly, which would be his way. He is a private person, which is why, his support with me writing the book has been incredible, because he has had to come to terms with the fact that obviously I'm talking about it publicly, and he's been hugely supportive of that, even though some of that's been quite painful for him. He does understand that it's my story, and as you say, this part of my marriage is just one part of my story. I haven't written a book that's about the fact that my husband was homosexual. I've written a book about my life that goes right from my early teens until the sort of toxic relationship that we've just talked about. So he understood that I wanted to tell all my story. Obviously he was incredibly courageous, like doing the interview with the Daily Mail that you referred to. So I think he's done it very quietly in his own way. He's told the people that are closest to him. He's not somebody who you meet him and he feels the need to tell you, about his personal life and his sexuality, within 5 minutes of meeting him. A lot of people who meet him, wouldn't even think about it, probably wouldn't even know. He just, deals with that in his own sort of reserved way, I think, and with a lot of dignity and grace, I would say.
What advice would you give other women in your shoes? Any woman, like, you saw Philip Schofield coming out last year saying
Yeah.
his wife must have been going through the same thing. What advice would you give to other women? Because I'm sure more and more men, because of the free world we now live in, are being more courageous to now come out of their marriages rather than staying there trapped. They're feeling more courageous. But what on the other side, we have to also think about the women. What advice would you give them?
Um, I think that it's a grieving process. That's the advice I would give. You have to grieve a number of different things. So I mean, what I think is great in terms of Philip Schofield and his wife, he's sort of come out as well and said that their marriage is still a work in progress because they're still trying to work through that. My relationship with my ex-husband is now very, very positive, and I think it does demonstrate that with the right will and the right behaviors, you can still be really good friends and really close on the other side of it. So it's not necessarily the end of any kind of relationship with that person, in the same way that any, relationship, divorce, whatever, doesn't have to be the end of your relationship entirely. But it is a grieving process. You sort of have to grieve the relationship that you once have and accept that it now might be something different going forward. I think you have to grieve the loss of what you sort of thought that you had. For me, I always say, it's a little bit like waking up on my 18th birthday and my parents going, well, actually, we need to tell you you were adopted. And you sort of think, well, hang on a minute. Everything I thought I knew and I relied on now is sort of a lie. And you go back through photos of, holidays and things like that. I'm thinking, well, how true was that? I had love letters and Valentine's cards that I'd kept out of sentimentality. And you're thinking, well, did you really mean that? So there's lots of questioning that goes on. And I think people, whether it's a male or a female that that goes through this needs to understand that that questioning is just natural, and you need to sort of let that percolate. And I think the reality is, no, it wasn't all of a lie. You know, that there would definitely been some truth in there, in terms of how much they cared about you, even if they didn't share all of themselves with you. So I think accept the grieving process and understand that it is your process. It's not just about them and their coming out. It's also about you and the change that brings for you, and the grief and the loss that goes with that. And I think, you know, grief is a, you know, as if any kind of loss is a sort of strange and varied thing, isn't it? You know, that you can travel a long way down the road in terms of moving forward, and then just on any one day, any one thing can just take you right back to that pain point. But it does get better. You know, I know it's a real cliche, but I do think that time is a great healer. And I think you just have to make some conscious choices, particularly conscious choices about how you see that relationship. You know, it wasn't all bad. There was some really good things. You know, there were things that you loved about that person at the outset. Those things haven't actually changed. And I always say that, you know, I married a smart, funny, intelligent, you know, engaging guy. And he is still all of those things. And that's why I still have him in my life, because I didn't want to lose that side in that relationship. So also make some choices. You know, the world, particularly not in relation to sexuality, but the thing I find really interesting is when I talk about my ex-husband, you know, I've done it at work and I've done it with friends, whatever, and I say words like, oh yeah, I was talking to my ex-husband, and instantly people go, oh. And it's sort of more of a physical, like, you know, and it's a noise that they make, because they absolutely expect that if you describe anyone as your ex, that you must hate them and have a bad relationship. And I find that incredibly sad, because I don't think it has to be that way. Some people, yes, you can't continue to have a relationship with, you know, because of the breakdown of your relationship. But, you know, we do have choices. We don't have to just hate somebody just because we're no longer in that particular type of relationship with them. We can evolve and have a different type of relationship. And I think the best advice I was given to me by my best friend, is that she said to me, you have to stop trying to stop loving him. Because she was right. I sort of felt like I needed to stop loving him because that would help me get over it. And the reality was that love just needed to be allowed to evolve into something different from what it was. And as soon as I stopped trying to stop loving him, it all got a whole lot easier.
Wow. That is such a lovely advice, though. And I never looked at it that way, and it's true, because pain is painful. It's when you focus on hate. Hate is painful as well. You know, you waste all your energy. You hate someone. It takes all your emotion. Makes you depressed. Makes you anxious. I say to people, just focus on love. It's easier. Just find what makes love, where you could give the love, and spend that your energy on that. But it's much easier. But Caroline, you're doing an amazing thing. You're writing a book now. Could you tell us about your book, and how can anyone get a copy once it's out? Because I'm so
So
excited, you know,
yeah,
your insights. It's just tell us.
so so I've written a book that's about my life story. So I'm apologizing now because the title has a swear word in it, so kind of put your fingers in your ears now if you're offended by that. But the book is called All the Twats I Met Along the Way, and it's available on my website, so you can go to carolynhobday.com and find it there, and particularly do that if you'd like a signed copy, because obviously I can send them out and sign the copies. Alternatively, it can be found on Amazon and other online bookstores. It should ultimately be available in real bookstores when we're allowed to go back to them, but at the moment it's available online. So yeah, either through Amazon, where you can get the ebook, or the paper copy, or through carolynhobday.com.
Oh wow! And just give us a small summary about your book for anyone who's so intrigued to read your book. What would they get from reading this book?
So it's a book that's all about being human. It's about growing up. It's about failing. It's about falling down and picking yourself back up again. It's about finding your identity. It's about the fact that being an adult is an incredibly messy business. And rather than our insta-perfect lives that we're sort of encouraged to portray, it's actually about saying, here's the reality of what it's like just to be a human being and try to be an adult, and how we're all just working it out as we go. And it'll be relatable for whether a man or a woman. If you've just lived a life, been a human being, failed and messed up at any point, then I think it's a story for you.
Carolyn, I will be getting a copy of your book, and I hope you sign it when I get mine, because I believe that your story will inspire so many. I think I love what you said about human and what our expectation as adults are. Everyone has this perfect view about the world, the way the world should be, but no one, the day we start realizing that the world is very messy, and we just have to learn to just live in the mess, adapt ourselves to the whole mess of the world. It'd be much easier for all of us, and we'll get by much easier, rather than trying to fit into what stereotype has said. It has to be this, it has to be this. It just doesn't make it. It's so difficult, and I think it puts a lot of stress on people. In terms of pandemic, a final question in terms of this whole pandemic, it's affected so many people emotionally, people in a relationship. Has your choices in life, or like what has happened from your ex-husband to this toxic relationship, has that affected you during this pandemic? Has it given you time to reflect about what you want in your next relationship?
Yes, definitely. Absolutely, it has. I think one of the threads that runs through my book is about my low self-worth, and those self-esteem issues are really what allowed these different sort of bad relationships into my life. So one of the things that I did after the last relationship, the toxic relationship, was like press that reset button on me, like I said. So now I have a different standard. I value myself. I know what my imperfections are, and I try and work on those, but I try not to beat myself up so much for them. But I value myself, and I talk about, particularly on sort of my Carolyn Hobdey side of my business, that I can take people from self-loathing to self-love, and take them through that journey. So I think for me, I have a different standard. And so now it's about, I only accept into my world those people that sort of meet that standard. And if it means that some people don't, and my sort of, whether it's a friendship or working relationship, whatever, doesn't continue with them, then that's because I've set my standard and I communicate that standard. So, very much so. And I think, I actually class myself, I've lived on my own a lot. I live on my own now, and I lived on my own a lot during lockdown, apart from when I've been to my support bubble. And I actually at times am massively grateful, because what it's made me do is I reflect back on all the relationships that I could have been stuck in lockdown with. And I realize how massively fortunate I am that I'm not having to endure the pandemic with those relationships. I have to say, my ex-husband is probably the exception to that. He's probably the one person who I could have spent lockdown with and had a really good laugh with, which says everything about where our relationship now is. But it's really why I set up Mayday, which is my other business. So Mayday is all about the process that I've developed of helping people to live the right life. So it's a 9-step process called the Fathom Framework. It's a step-by-step guide for people finding happiness. And it's really about identifying, what do you want out of life? How are you going to get to the end of your life and live it without any regrets? And how do you set a plan to make sure that you live your life in line with that, and making sure that those regrets aren't part of your world, and that you can sort of end your days, whenever that might happen to you, in whatever way, and think, actually, I've lived a life without regret. So Mayday is all about that. It's about life change. It's about taking control of your life, whether you've sort of got that great life and you just sort of think something just doesn't feel quite right, or whether change has been thrust upon you. So particularly at the moment, relationship breakdown has increased, obviously redundancy has increased, people just taking a long, hard look at their lives and going, I don't want this anymore, or I want a different normal going forward. Mayday is exactly for them. And it's like I said, a 9-step guided process that can help people find happiness that they've defined, not what everybody else thinks they should live by.
Wow, I will definitely be checking that out. And thank you so much, Caroline Hobdey, for joining me today and joining the Painless Universal conversation. I think your message is really one that's really will touch so many people. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.